Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Moby the Explorer. For those of you who are new, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is another one of my conversations in my docu-series. If you have not heard the other ones, I am going to invite you, even almost beg you to go back and listen to the other conversations. Listen, today you do not want to miss this conversation. I have a thinker, a scholar, a seeker, a Garveyite, a student, and a professor. He's all of that and more. Lean into this conversation. Leave your comments. We want to hear from you. Like, share, and subscribe. Come with me. This conversation is about you. Okay, Dr. Rodney, thank you for taking time out. I know you're a busy professor, and I thank you for taking time to talk with us and have a conversation with me today. If you have anything you want to say before I ask you the first question, you are more than welcome to do so.
No, I'm good. Thank you. I think this is a wonderful project you're working on, and I'm glad to be a part of it and to support you in any way I can.
Thank you. First question. What do you think about the challenge, I'm going to call it a challenge, that African Americans have with other Blacks that have migrated to the U.S. as it relates to our relationship?
So I tend to reframe these things a little bit differently than and kind of like most people. I don't see it particularly as a challenge that I think African Americans have. I think Black people, like any other people, are not a monolithic group. We are not all the same. Even within the African American community, we have variation. In the Caribbean community from which I originate, we have variation. And as long as you have variation in culture and in perspective and in worldview, we learn to live with each other. So I think to reframe your question a little bit, I think it's a part of, how does these different groups of Africans, of Black people in the diaspora, kind of learn to live with each other, and we're going through that process. And we as Black people from the Caribbean and African American people, we've been going through that process for as long as we've been in the Western Hemisphere, right? There has been lots of cross-cultural engagement between Africans who were brought from Africa and then spread out across the region, right? Some of us are speaking Spanish, some of us speak Portuguese as our colonial tongue, some of us speak French and Haitian Creole, and some of us speak English. So I think that variation is going to create, all kinds of tension. And I don't think it's particularly to African Americans why that tension exists. I think the tension exists because we are learning to exist and coexist together.
Okay. And I did not let people know, if you don't mind, what's your ethnicity? What do you identify?
So I'm born in Jamaica. So obviously I have, Caribbean roots, and but I do identify very strongly as an African Jamaican. There are those Jamaicans who don't claim Africa the same way. I am not one of those. I claim Africa. I believe that we are African people, and we originate out of Africa, and Africa is our home, and that defines even how I see myself as a Jamaican, right? So I am a Jamaican, but with strong, African-centered leanings.
So before you migrated to the U.S., we know that there are a lot of images of African Americans that usually people develop their perspective of us from the media. But before you migrated, what was your idea or what was your perspective about African Americans?
So I would say that in general, Jamaican culture has a very healthy respect for African American culture. And there are lots of reasons, again, for that historically. We've always latched on to the fact that we look like each other, right? So by phenotype, we are Black people, and we've always loved and respected the United States as a country that has given this vision of democracy and freedom to the rest of the world. So as far as we're concerned, Black Americans represent that to us, And so we've always had a healthy respect for African American culture, and that means the sports of the culture. I mean, when I was growing up, when I was coming of age, basketball in the streets was huge. In fact, basketball in the streets had replaced, if you know Jamaican culture, basketball in the streets had replaced cricket that was being played in the road earlier in my years, and then basketball replaced because Michael Jordan was such an excellent basketball player, and we were all watching him on TV, and everybody wanted to be like Mike, literally, right? And in addition to that, you know, the music we've shared so much because in part because we speak English and communicate in English. We shared in that regard the same colonial masters. Music has always crossed the threshold for both of our cultures. So early Jamaican music borrowed very heavily from Black American music, from Motown music. So we all grew up listening to, you know, the Temptations, and we grew up listening to Curtis Mayfield, and, you know, our parents sang the songs and bought the records, and, you know, so we grew up with that culture and the movies. I mean, I was just watching Shaft the other day, the new version, because you grew up on the old one, you know, it was late Friday night TV in Kingston where I grew up. So there are just deep connections in the culture, in terms of the arts and the music, and again, as a Jamaican with African leanings, it was, you know, Marcus Garvey, who was our first national hero, had come of age in the United States, right? He built a movement of international Black people in the United States. So we recognized that Black America had a lot. We had benefited a lot from Black America, and also shared a lot. So there was a really healthy, and I mean, our families had been moving, you know, to America all this time. So we didn't see a real sense of distinction, you know. Okay. For us. In fact, Black Americans were called, you know, Yankee, just like we call white American, you know. Yeah. we still do that. You're either foreigners or Yankees. You know, you show up in Jamaica, you're a Black American, you're a Yankee, right? Mm-hmm. And the girls like you because you dress like a Black American. I mean, again, back in them days, you were wearing Air Jordans, and, you know, you're wearing Nikes, and, you know, you represent. This morning, gosh, the kids were in class doing something, and they were playing crisscross, and the kids in Jamaica were all wearing, you know, the suspenders and the pants backwards, and I mean, just rich cultural exchange, no question. There's rich culture, lots of respect. God, we watched the movies, Boys in the Hood, and, you know, geez, just richness, and it was a street side conversation. So there was a lot of that there. We didn't see any big distinctions. We wanted to be, in many cases, Black America became the vision of what being Black meant for us. Right? The vision of Blackness for us was that's the Black person I want to be. You know, the swag, the way you dress, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak. You know, the good parts and the negative parts of the culture. You know, the gun culture is big in Jamaica, and a lot of that also we drew from first the spaghetti westerns, and then African American culture.
Okay, that's good. You know, I know you're a scholar, so I'm going to shift the questions. Are there any resources or books that you would advise anyone that's migrating to the U.S. that has an interest in knowing more about the plight of the African American and the transatlantic slave? Any resources or any books that you would say we should read, or anyone migrating here?
As in migrating from the Caribbean to here?
Caribbean, African.
Or back and forth? So here's the funny part, right? I remember even when I was going to university, when I just started my early university, so I did my early degrees in the Caribbean at the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica. And I mean, we had classes on African American literature, and we studied African American. There's no way for, at least in how our curriculum is set up, and I don't know about other people, but you know how our curriculum is set up in the Caribbean, and it's a Caribbean curriculum. We write it like a curriculum for the 20 countries that make up especially the former English-speaking Caribbean, the former British Caribbean. We write the curriculum, literally our early books are called The People Who Came. And so when we write about Africa, we write about Africa as the experience of the transatlantic slave trade. So we come up with a kind of really heavy understanding of how we came to be here as African people, and not just how we came to be in this island called Jamaica. We came up with an understanding of how we came here to be in the West. So when you listen to, for example, Jamaican reggae music, and reggae, Rastafarians and reggae music kind of go hand in hand when you talk about Jamaica, um, it's a big part of our education. And the music talks about the West. So even before I talk about a reading list, when people ask me about reading lists, I said, before I give you a reading list, you really need to just listen to Jamaican reggae music. Because that is how we are socialized. Long before we got deep into books and the intellectual traditions, we learned from our reggae artists who we are as African people and who we are as Western African people. So you'll hear, Beenie Man has a song, and in it he'll say, too much wickedness is in the West, right? So we see the Western hemisphere from North America to South America as a part of the crucible of the experience of transatlantic slavery. There is no, in a way, no mental separation between what, in our minds, what happened to African Americans and what happens to Jamaicans. We are brought on the same ships. What happens to Haitians? We're brought on the same ships, brought through the same period of slavery and domination, and then treated pretty much in the same way. Now, we understand that there are nuances there, so we're not trying to subsume all of our struggles in a way that we don't respect and recognize this distinction, but we know that we come to be here as a Black people because of that shared experience, that shared struggle. But again, in terms of literature, you talk about, so number one, I'd say everybody needs to read, anybody in the Black world needs to read The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, in part because Garvey's, these are the speeches and pronouncements of Marcus Garvey that was compiled by his wife who survived him. And Amy Garvey, and he had two wives named Amy. so this Philosophy and Opinions comes in 2 volumes, and it talks about who Marcus Garvey was and the way in which Marcus Garvey writes. Again, you can see that perspective of, here's a person who's born in Jamaica. He travels through the Caribbean and then moves to the United States, where he organizes Black people the world over into a movement that is about 5 million people strong, African people, Black people all over the Black world. So I'd say you must read Marcus Garvey. Rupert Lewis has a book that was just done like 2 years ago on the biography of Garvey, like a modern biography. It's really good. So I'd say read that, and everybody should read that, not particular to Black Americans or Black Jamaicans. We should all read that. Garvey helped us to understand our place as Black people in relation to white supremacy and our place as African people. And I think it's important for us to delve into Garvey. Then we all read, well, I would say we all read, but a lot of us read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X, I remember even when I converted to Islam in Jamaica. The autobiography had a big influence on my life as a Black person growing up in Jamaica, understanding Malcolm X's redemptive and transformative experience as a Muslim in America. Because we in many ways we identify with growing up with a similar circumstance of a racist plantation style system that depresses Black people, and then we're forced to find new outlets for our ideas and our constructs and how we live our lives. So definitely the autobiography played a big part in who we become. And I still watch videos of Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, who's from Trinidad, born in Trinidad, comes to the United States and finds his feet and becomes a part of the student struggle here. He would eventually die in Africa. So again, there are those of us, and I'm sure there are other people, but there are those of us who don't really see a distinction. Garvey taught us, he said, until Africa is free, no Black group of people is free. So Africa must be free for us to be free. But we have to understand that, right? So yeah, we should free America. But ultimately, in freeing Blacks in America or freeing Blacks in Jamaica or the Caribbean or freeing Blacks in the UK is just a part of what must be done in order for us to make sure Africa is free. So that's the construct that makes my frame, and it's very heavily Rasta influenced. I know if you listen to Rastafarians sound like that, but that's our thinking. So again, that's where we immerse ourselves. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
Do you see any similarities in African American culture and Jamaican culture?
Absolutely. So many similarities because like I said, we're an African culture. So number one, the value of the word, the spoken word, heavily valued in our cultures, right? We brought that with us. It remains with us. So that's why poetry and music and the arts are so powerful for us, because it is the power of the word and how the word makes the world. That's still heavily valued there, very heavily valued here. The power of God and faith,
Mm-hmm.
um, and
Yeah.
the active engagement of that in our lives. We are deeply spiritually connected people. That's still very much Jamaican. It's very much Black American. It's African. It's who we are as an African people. Um, the way in which we view family, not just as a construct of, mother, father, and the number of kids. This
Wonderful.
idea that family is an extension of a household, right? Family extension is very critical to who we are. We have lots of extended family culture. Somebody just shows up and somebody adopted them and they just family.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a generation later that you find out that you weren't really related, but grandma said that's cousin so and so, and that's cousin so and so. Nobody questions it. So that respect, that healthy respect, and love for family, that's big in the cultures. Of course, the love and the connection to the land. We brought that with us in a way from Africa. We came from an agricultural world, the agricultural society. Black American people still love that, still deep connections to that. We still want our own piece of ground. Jamaicans are exactly the same way. We live for that. And as soon as we're able to get it done, we need a key to turn so we can see those doors are ours. That's our deep in our culture, similar shared culture. So I'd say those, a lot more things, but those things define us, love for freedom, a freedom loving people, because we have been in the crucible of oppression in part for so long. But I always say that we come from the oldest gene pool on earth. If we don't understand freedom, who will? So we're a freedom loving people. African Americans the same way, Jamaicans the same way. We like to do for self and do for community. Nothing gives us greater joy than to be working for ourselves in our community. If we could all do that, we'd probably not deal with too many other people. And it's not out of selfishness. It's just, that's the passion that's inside. Our people gave that to us, and we've continued to hold that the best way we can. We love our community, and we love serving it.
What about differences? And let me say why I asked that question, because oftentimes I hear the thing, and I want everyone to be very clear that we are one people, no matter where we were dropped off. We're one people, and you've made that thing very clear in your message. But we know that there are some cultural differences, and I like to learn from different cultures.
Different cultures, yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
What are the differences, and what is it that I can adopt in my own family, even,
Absolutely.
and strengthen our family?
So yeah, obviously there are differences. I also like to make the case that, if you look at Africa, it we don't always see it that way because we haven't been taught properly about Africa. But Africa is the most diverse continent on earth, right? Here's a continent that has over 50,000 different language groups. If you look at Nigeria alone, there's over 500 languages that they have identified, and a whole bunch of other languages they have not identified, right? And this is God, hundreds of thousands of years of history and civilization. So obviously we have deep variation among us, even though we share certain similarities. And that's a part of the richness of Africa. So, in terms of differences that I think we share, some of those differences I think are cultural, in part because of African American needing to respond to being a minority under white majority rule, right? Which Jamaica would walk away from in the 40s. We were successful in pushing out the British, and Jamaica was such that the British didn't want to stick around, so they all ran away. And then we had a prime minister in the 60s, and I keep saying I'm going to write about this, but in the 70s, Michael Malley, who was really a Jamaican white, but they say he's Jamaican brown. But there was a time when he was kind of courting communism. And as he was kind of courting communism, a whole bunch of middle-class Jamaicans, a lot of the browns and some of the whites, got really upset. And as they got upset, he said, well, there are 12 flights a day to Miami. You can all just go. And a whole bunch of them went. So I think that helped to make more of the country look like me. Even though a lot of it did look like me before, but it certainly does look a lot like me now, and maybe quicker. So I think that sense of kind of national ownership that we have is a little bit different for us than for African Americans. And that's just kind of an accident of history and less of culture, right? African Americans fought the oppression of whites in the United States for a long time. White people just wouldn't leave. So the fact that they stuck around, man, we've had to learn to live with white people in America in a way that we don't have to live with them in the same way in Jamaica. So that alters our framework a little bit. But to kind of be clear about it, I think one of the things that separate Jamaicans from most other Black people is we tend to be really frank in how we engage. We are not conflict averse. So it's not uncommon for us to just kind of say what's on our minds. And sometimes we're not particular about who we're talking to, and that kind of rubs people the wrong way. But, other Black people seeing that kind of look on and say, well, why do you think you're able to do that? I remember one of my mentors here, I belong to an Islamic community, and I'm actually the president of this organization called the Pan-African Ahmadiyya Muslim Association. We're a bunch of Muslims and we're Pan-Africanists, right? But one of the members here who I met in St. Louis, my brother Munir, he's passed away now. He said to me, he had been a soldier in World War II. And he said, while he was in the Philippines and he was in Japan, he said, when we were overseas, we met some soldiers from the British West Indies. And he said, I was always impressed with them. And I said, well, why? What was particular about them? And he said, well, what I noticed with them was they didn't have any respect for the rules of segregation. So they would put up all kinds of rules. They would say, okay, the Black soldiers couldn't go here, and the Black soldiers couldn't go there, and the Black soldiers couldn't do this, and the Black soldiers couldn't do that. And he said, well, you British West Indian types, it just didn't matter to you. You just went where you wanted. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of how we are. And the funny part is, I grew up in Jamaica with one of those British West Indian soldiers who told me the other side of the story. He said, we were abroad, right? We were abroad, and they would put up a sign and say, the British West India Regiment would take a shower on this day and this time. And he said all the Jamaicans would look at the list, tear it down, and then go take their showers when they wanted to. And it didn't occur to any of them that they were soldiers in an army, because their thing is, these white people can't tell us when to take a shower. Right. Right? But I mean, remember, here was a culture and a country that we'd never experienced anything like the lynch mobs of the United States in the 20s. We'd never experienced anything like a Ku Klux Klan. So we didn't experience the kind of modern terrorism of white people in the same way, right? It came, but not in the same way. So because of that, there's always this spirit of, look, I don't have to listen to that. You can say it. It sounds good to you, but I don't actually have to listen to it. So that sense of, a kind of, strong national idealistic sense of who I am as a person, I think shines through with us. So sometimes when you talk about our tension, I think that tension shows up with us and pretty much every other group of Black people, right? Because even Africans ask me that question, why is it that when Jamaicans are part of things, they always have to lead? And I'm like, well, because we really don't know anything else. We've always been taught that it's your right to lead, that no one is different than you and no one is better than you, and you should assert yourself. That's just how your people teach you. And all Jamaicans are taught that fundamentally one day they will leave this island and they will go abroad and they will represent their families and their nation. That's pretty much how we're all taught. And when that happens, we have a proverb, we say, learn to dance at home before you dance abroad. So learn to dance a yard before you dance abroad, which means you learn to behave yourself in a certain way here to represent us. So when you go there, you represent us. So you're always going to be a representative of your people, an ambassador. So that's how we're taught. I'm not sure lots of other people feel that sense of, I'm an ambassador for my community. And so that's kind of different. That's one of the kind of big obvious differences I see. The other thing is we are not going to put ourselves at the back. Never. We don't really know how. We try, out of humility, but we're not taught that, right? We're not taught that. We don't teach our children that. Our parents didn't teach us that. So you learn to be humble, yeah, but if there's a line and it's too long, then you start thinking there has to be a way around this line.
Right.
And here in America today, we call that privilege, right?
Yes.
Especially when white people show up and they're like, well, you're not going to stay in line. No, they're going to break the queue and gone, right? Mm-hmm. But coming up where we came up, they're like, that's not a matter of privilege. This is what you do to get away. You're not going to stay here. If you know somebody in the line, they're going to stick you in there. And we all scream over it for 20 minutes until you get what you want. Yeah. So that I would think of as a big cultural difference. Some of the other things are, I don't know if they're just differences in culture as much as they're just, just kind of people differences. And I can't think of some of them now. Okay. I don't know. It might come up if you ask another question.
Okay. Well, I'm on my last question for you. I don't want to hold you for too long. But lastly, if you had to give any advice to Blacks around the world about cultivating a better sense of pride in who we are, and as well as becoming one, no matter what ethnic group you identify, how do we strengthen our relationships to become that one?
So I'd say there are three things. One, remember who we are. Remember our core values. We are an African people. Our people existed in the world as people, upright, walking human beings, when no other group of people was doing that. And I don't mean for 25 years. For 1,000 years, the only human beings walking the earth as human beings look like you and I. History has told us that, and every time they go dig up some new fossil, they reaffirm it, right? So imagine that. For the first 5,000 years, 10,000 years of human history, the first people were us. So if we can remember that about ourselves, then we can know that these are just moments in time to which we are subject. We struggle through them, we fight through them, we have to. But this is just a moment in time. It's not going to last forever. This struggle that we face is not going to last forever. We've always been, we made the world's great religions, no matter what these people like to tell us, right? These were us. We made the first philosophers and we made the first politics and we wrote the first books and we did these things. And history records that no matter how hard they try to hide it. Every time they go dig over there in Africa, they find something new that we did. Right. So that's now a given. And then the second thing I would say is if you can keep that intentionality about us, then number two, you don't believe the hype. Anything the other guy says, you don't believe it. Because everything he says is fundamentally a lie. He's lied to us for 400, 500 years about who we are. When is he going to ever tell us the truth? That's never going to happen. So don't believe it. And that then means that we have to educate ourselves about who we are. Right? In open and honest way. There's a young man, a rapper in the UK, his name is Akala. And he wrote a book, what does he call it? Natives in Empire or something like that. It was a really cool book. He creates a sweeping history of Black people, especially in the West, right? He comes from Jamaican roots. He lives in the UK, born and grew in the UK. But he's writing this book in part to do what you talk about, to connect us to the broader history that is us, right? Right after the United States fight and get its independence, Haiti does the same thing. The first independent Black country on earth, post, modern slavery and colonialism, is Haiti, our neighbor just south of us, right? The French would punish them for that independence. But the fact is, they proved that Black people could take a country, they could run a country, they could run white people out. They proved that in the most virulent form of slavery, right? And there were some white people there who joined them Black Haitians. And the Haitians call them honorary Blacks, right? So think about that. Wrote a constitution that made some white people Black because they supported them in revolution. So these are things we've thought about before. I say to people all the time, recognize that there's no problem that we as Black people have that we have not already worked on and solved, right? Our people have already solved our problems. We just need to go find out what they had done in order to solve those problems. So study our culture, study our history, have a wholesome vision and a wholesome view of who we are. And don't fall prey to any of the false narratives about who we're told we are, because they're false narratives. The third, I think, and really critical thing is don't fall into this trap of ever believing that we can do this alone, as our individual groups. I know there's this whole new thing now of, the ADOS and the foundational African American, and these wonderful phrases trying to describe specific groups of us beyond what's already there. And I take issue with them for only one reason. They are not the language of who we are, because our nature is an inclusive people. One of the reasons why white people were able to dominate Africa was because Black people trusted so easily, right? White people showed up, they're like, look, this guy, where you from? You lost your home, you lost your life, you showed up on my land. Okay, fine, there's some land over there. You can go live, you can have a life. The European instinct would have been to kill you and chase you off, right? The African instinct is there's enough here for you to benefit and to thrive and be a human being. Only this dude had a plan to dominate and steal and pillage, which he did, right? But it's that sense of broader human love that allowed him to do that. And to me, we have to go back again to that place when we talk about these issues, right? That place of broader human love. This is who we are. So we should never forget that, thinking that some of these other more regressive things is going to somehow give us more benefit, fundamentally in the eyes of white people. We're not looking for, economic benefit from white people. If you read Garvey, he was very clear. Garvey was one of the first people to figure out that Black people, especially Black people in America, had a great deal of constructed wealth. Mm-hmm. Garvey figured that out. And he said, if you can put so much money into the white man's war effort so he could go dominate other people, we could put that same money and that energy into us as a people. So let us collectively create this new experience for us. So I think self-knowledge is key. And that's what I'm saying, education is key. Reflecting back on who we are as an African people. Stop using European frames to see ourselves, because those frames just don't represent us really well. So we have to find a way to step away from that and see the richness of our culture. I mean, again, we're different Black people, but look how rich that culture is. I was thinking earlier, if you look at us, there is no mystery as to why in the last decade, the fastest men and women on our running tracks are either from the Caribbean or from North America, right? Or from the UK. We come from the same stock. Yeah. Right? We come from the same stock. We are fundamentally the same stock of people. So that reservoir is what we should draw on. We shouldn't draw on the limited experience of the last 400 years of being, under European thumb, because that is not who we are. We are not just 400 years of history. Our people walked this earth long before anybody else even knew earth existed. They thought it was flat. They literally thought it was flat, and we were making boats. Right? And planes. And planes, because they found gliders and planes in Egypt, right? We were making universities and they were beating rocks. So when we see ourselves in the fullness of who we are, so I can't stress enough how important it is as a people to see ourselves, to really see ourselves for who we are.
That's it. That is it. People, I told you this was a conversation that you would not want to miss. Again, I told you in the beginning, he's a scholar, he's a thinker, he's a seeker, he's a student. If you did not understand anything, or if you need any more of him, he is Dr. Rodney. I know how to get in touch with him. Leave your comments, your questions, anything. This was, I thank you. I just thank you for taking your time. He was my professor. He still is my professor. And all I want us to do is learn from you. I can learn from you. You can learn from me. and together we can be better. That is it. That's the purpose in all of this. Thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Be blessed.